After millions of years of home consoles only having 2 controller ports, the Nintendo 64 shocked the world when it burst onto the scene in 1996 by offering not 3, not 5, but 4 controller ports. And it's for that reason why this console is the highlight of pretty much any party in the late 90s. Well, except for the ones that didn't revolve around those weird homemade crystals that are popular at my neighbor Terry's birthday bashes anyway. But hell, even at the parties where those things were popular, the Nintendo 64 still managed to turn a few heads since, after all, it does have some great 4-player games like Mario Kart, Mario Party, Diddy Kong Racing, GoldenEye, F-Zero, No Mercy, Razor Freestyle Scooter, Smash Bros, and of course all the other staples that everyone knows and loves that still hold up to this very day. And while the PlayStation 1 may have been ripping all kinds of ass in the video game world during the same time frame thanks to all the overwhelming third-party support, the 64's title Undisputed Party Champion was hard to deny, which is why the developer Atlus took a glance at Nintendo's 64-bit box and wanted a piece of the pie for themselves. However, since they were a little too busy devoting their hearts and souls to the PlayStation 1, they turned to a little developer called Rakugen and said, "Hey, you guys wouldn't happen to want to make a 4-player Mario Kart clone for the 64 if we paid for it, would you?" To which they responded, "Yeah, sure, I guess. But only if we could use snowboards instead of go-karts, and instead of full-grown men, women, monkeys, and dinosaurs, the characters are all going to be made up of cast members from Cheers." And then after some harsh negotiations and a few compromises, Snowboard Kids was born, but can this Mario Kart clone really compare to the real deal? Well, honestly, that question's a little bit complicated, but thankfully I'm qualified to answer it for everyone in the world outside of Hong Kong, Connecticut. If that is where you're watching this video from right now, though, I am legally required to ask you to stop right now. Otherwise, I'm going to prison for a really long time. But anyway, now that we've got all that legal mumbo-jumbo out of the way, let me tell you a thing or two about Atlus Kart 64. Alright, so just in case you're not the type of person who lives life on the edge, this game gives you a very detailed tutorial. In fact, maybe a little too detailed. Snowboard Kids is a racing game without brakes. Well, that's just ridiculous. Everyone knows that snowboards have brakes. Or do they? Oh! Don't get to somebody! Please! Oh! Okay, so that part actually checks out. When moving the joystick, the player will move there.
Everything my dad ever told me was a lie.
Bottom left and bottom right allow sharp turns. Now use the control stick and go around the corner. Okay, so this tutorial completely reeks of an early 3D game that came out in an era where people looked at the analog stick the same way cavemen looked at fire. Like, yeah, I know there are some modern tutorials that'll tell you how to do things like move forward, but the difference is that it never takes more than like a second, let alone 23 seconds. I mean, just imagine what I could have done with those 23 seconds and I'm never gonna get back now. Honey, what do you mean we're getting a divorce? Not again!
Damn right, you understand me!
Well, I was gonna use 10 of those 23 seconds and make love to my wife, but I don't think she's in the mood right now. After you've endured the intense training from the tutorials, the game has you select one of 5 characters. Slash, Jam, Nancy, and Tommy are all 10 years old, but for some reason, the game went out of its way to make the 5th character, Linda, the only one who's 11 years old. None of this really matters one way or another, I just don't get it is all. And as if that wasn't weird enough, spoiler alert, there's also a hidden ninja character, Shinobi, whose age is unknown, and if you ask me, I think that's a tad bit sus. I mean, if I'm not allowed to compete against kids in sports anymore because my stats naturally got higher with age, then I think it's bullshit that the game's letting Shinobi get away with it just because he's a ninja. Whatever, I'm picking Jam, cause aside from this lady I went on a few dates with back in the Reagan administration, I've never heard anyone with this name before. I mean, it's a much cooler name than Nancy, Tommy, Linda, and especially Slash, who like 47 other dinguses already go by. But anyway, now that we've established that Jam's clearly the coolest one here, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the game, shall we? Okay, so if you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth right now and don't already know the concept of a racing game, then I don't know how you managed to avoid an untimely demise in a grease fire, let alone get on the internet or watch a video about a semi-obscure racing game from 1997. But assuming I don't gotta tell you what a racing game is, the key difference with Snowboard Kids is that you use all kinds of items to sabotage your opponents. Unlike a game like Mario Kart, though, Snowboard Kids isn't running any kind of charity or anything like that, so if you want to use these items, then you're gonna have to buy them with cold hard cash, and to get money, all you gotta do is collect coins that are scattered around the course. Each coin's worth 100 pesos, or whatever the currency in this game's called, which is exactly how much it costs to buy an item. So basically, 1 of coin equals 1 of item.
The numbers don't lie!
However, unless you're some kind of a whiz kid who never misses a coin, then you're going to want to make sure you're stocked up on cash. Not only because the item boxes in this game are basically hazards if you can't afford them, but also because any money you got left over at the end of each race is kept, which you could then use to buy new gear from the shop. What's the best scheme in this game to get rich as quickly as possible, you ask? Well, obviously by doing some badass moves on your board, bruh. Much like the tutorial theorized, tricks are moves that look cool, and to do them, all you gotta do is hold A to crouch down, let go as you're going off of a ramp to jump, and then turn your analog stick in whatever direction you want to flip or spin or whatever. You can also do grinds every now and then, which is pretty cool, but unfortunately, the rails are few and far between for some reason. Aside from making money though, doing tricks is only moderately fun given how limited the trick selection is, and it doesn't even help you gain speed or anything like that either. So if you got enough money saved up in a race, then you can theoretically scratch your BUT while you're in the air without hindering your chances of winning. But to be fair though, this game did come out before the Tony Hawk series, and the tricks do hold up well enough decades later, so all in all, I still think it's a feature that adds to the game. As far as the actual items themselves are concerned though, that's actually another area where this game differs from Mario Kart, in that there's two different types of items that you get depending on the color item box you go through. The first type are shots, which, as the name implies, are projectiles that you can fire using the Z button. Going through all the shots though, first are the slapsticks, which are basically just hands that bitch slap your opponents and make them fall down. Bombs that cover a wide radius but could also harm the user. The snowball, which turns anyone who gets hit into a snowman, causing them to lose control for a little bit and crash into walls or fly off the course. However, anybody who becomes a snowman and crosses the finish line does still win the race, plus, if they don't happen to have any hazards in their path, then they're pretty much unaffected by the attack. Then there's the freeze shot that temporarily freezes anyone that gets hit by it, although once frozen, even the person who fired the shot could crash into the block of ice. And then finally there's the parachutes, which are definitely the most frustrating shots to get hit with, but also the most satisfying to use, seeing as how they send the victims high up into the air, only for them to slowly descend back to the ground afterwards, which wastes a bunch of time. All the shots kinda sorta home into the opponents, not quite as well as the red shells from Mario Kart, but obviously better than the green shells. However, it is worth noting that you can avoid shots by timing a jump just right. Then of course there's the regular items that you use with the B button, and these are a lot more unique. First, there's the ghosts that slow your opponents down, usually whoever's in first place, or second if the user happens to be winning, but sometimes it's just random. Then there's an item that turns you invisible and causes attacks to pass through you, the rat face that steals money from your opponents, the fan that speeds you up for a little bit, rocks that you could use to trip people, and pans that flatten everybody in the course, unless of course they're invisible or going up the lift. But speaking of the lift though, that's another thing that's pretty unique about this game. You see, all two of the other snowboard racing games that I could recall playing in my lifetime just have one long course, but Snowboard Kids on the other hand does laps like all the other racing games that exist. And since snowboard races typically work best on hills, the only way to make a lap system possible is to have a way to get back to the top once you reach the bottom. You know, something like using a helicopter, my buddy Lonnie giving you a ride in his Dodge, or as Snowboard Kids chose a ski lift. I mean, personally, I would've went with Lonnie since he needs the work right now, but to be honest, I really like the ski lift system. The ski lift can be pretty infuriating the first time you play this game, since only one person can use it at a time, which often results in everyone crashing into each other. And if it ain't you going up the lift, then you're gonna have to be patient for a few seconds that are gonna feel like an eternity. While this could definitely be frustrating if you're not the one getting the lift first, it does make multiplayer with actual human beings that much more entertaining, which, after all, is the main thing this game was going for. Whenever I am the first one to the lift, the feeling I get from watching everyone crash and burn behind me can be just as satisfying as sex, except here, I'm actually having it. How about now?
You understand me, Lisa?
Before I move on from the lifts though, I must say that they do feel a bit out of place in the stages that don't even have snow in them to begin with. But I guess the fact that a snowboard game has stages without snow in the first place is even weirder. I mean, it kind of feels like the developers chose a snowboard theme because the concept of having a lift in between laps was intriguing to them, but then after making like 3 stages, they were just like, oh, why do we have to choose snow? Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining since the lack of snow really doesn't make a difference gameplay-wise, and all the stages that don't have snow do look pretty neat. It's just that I'm not quite convinced that this is very realistic, and realism's always my top priority when it comes to video games. I mean, snowboards are real, kids are real, but snowboarding without snow? That's just ridiculous. Although, to be fair, I don't know that I can't. I mean, technically it works. As far as the actual mechanics of the game, though, it is an early 3D game, so the controls aren't perfect by any means, regardless of which character or board you choose, and while the game is definitely fun, it kinda does feel a little incomplete. I don't think that they rushed it or anything like that, but back in 1997, I could totally see Atlus and pretty much any other developer not really knowing when enough was enough for a 3D game. To be fair, gamers back then didn't really have any idea how much 3D games should offer either, but if you have knowledge of what later games would become in the future, Snowboard Kids kinda feels like it's lacking some content. There's only a handful of boards you can buy from the shop, and there are some extra modes in the game, but completing them's really nothing to write home about, especially the shoot game that's basically just memorization, and they all kinda feel like they were developed in an afternoon by the programmer's son Stevie Big Whip Mandeville. May he rest in peace. There is a decent amount of extra content to unlock, like that Creep Shinobin and 3 extra courses, but 100%ing this game really shouldn't take longer than a weekend. However, I do feel like I should know that the game did see an enhanced port on the PS1 a few years later called Snowboard Kids Plus. And despite blockier graphics, the gameplay being an ass hair slower, and obviously the PlayStation's lack of controller ports, this seems like it's the finished version of the game with more characters, an actual story with some animated cutscenes, and a few other perks as well. Sadly though, this version was exclusive to Japan, so it's really not all that practical for what you get. But as for the 64 version though, it'd still be a great game to rent on the weekend if that were still a thing, but unless you've got friends, which of course I don't, then I don't think it's something that you'd want to pay full price for during its initial heyday, especially considering the fact that the game also requires its own dedicated memory card to save progress. No joke, out of the 123 blocks that are on a standard 64 memory card, a save file for Snowboard Kids hogs 121 of them. Not only that, but swapping back and forth between the memory card and the rumble pack's kind of a hassle, but I suppose that does kind of come with the territory on the 64. But seriously though, why the frigs this game need so many blocks to save? I could literally remember my progress off the top of my head. Or better yet, why can't it just save onto the actual cartridge? I mean, when Donkey Kong 64 had the audacity to require an expansion pack so you could play the game, they did at least include one in the box. But just imagine getting Snowboard Kids for Christmas in 1997 and having to erase all the save files to every other game you own. Well, you know, aside from Rayman 2 somehow anyway. It's not even like you know how many blocks it's gonna take right off the bat, so most people probably lost their progress after playing the game for the first time, since there's really no way to free up space once the game's already going. Memory card aside though, Snowboard Kids is definitely a great and oftentimes overlooked hidden gem on the 64. Music's catchy and memorable, the style's got tons of charm, the courses are imaginative, and the gameplay, while a little dated, still pretty solid once you get the hang of it after 1 or 2 races. In my opinion, it's not quite as good as Mario Kart 64, but if you're looking for some variety at your parties and have a parole officer to answer to, then Snowboard Kids is different enough to justify a spot in your 64 collection. What if I told you there was another game on the 64 that was so eerily similar to Snowboard Kids that it could have actually been a sequel? Well, if you want to know more, then make sure to tune in right now, because I've got nothing better to do anyway. Unless... How about now?
No! Get the hell out!
Well, alright then.
Snowboard Kids 2!
Wait a minute, Snowboard Kids 2? This isn't like a sequel, it is a friggin' sequel. The next time I see my unpaid intern, I'm docking his pay. But before we get to the actual gameplay, I gotta address the elephant in the room here. And that's what the frig's up with the title of this game being Snowboard Kids 2. I mean, what are they gonna call the next one? Snowboard Kids 3? Now that I got that piece of business off my ass, though, I've gotta say that even after finishing just 1 race, I'm already certain that this game's way better than the original. Man, it's not really a whole lot different here per se, aside from the fact that you don't crash into shops if you don't have any coins, which is neither an improvement nor a downgrade in my opinion, although, personally, I kinda like it. But they really did a fantastic job of improving just about everything that made the first game good to begin with. I mean, first of all, there's actually a story mode here with cute little cutscenes in between all the races in the single-player campaign. Sure, they might not be animated like some parts of Snowboard Kids Plus on the PlayStation 1, but it's still a lot better than still images with text, which is what most of the cutscenes in Snowboard Kids Plus consisted of anyway. Honestly, even though animated cutscenes are great and hold up forever, there is still a part of me that appreciates cutscenes in retro games that work within the hardware limitations of whatever console they were on. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but to me there's just a certain charm to it is all. And not only is there an actual story here, but this game's got friggin' bosses now. Sometimes it can be like a tad bit frustrating and require a little pattern memorization here and there, but it's not like it's ever too hard or anything like that, so, you know what? I dig it. Literally everything I could think of that the first game did, Snowboard Kids 2 just does a little bit better, which is what every video game sequel should do. The save files are stored to your actual cartridge rather than needing an entire memory card, which is already enough proof that the game's better than its predecessor. Plus, there's more characters, more tracks, a fun hub world where you can interact with other characters in the game, costume options, courses with various themes like summer, a haunted house, and space. The courses without snow don't use lifts anymore. Thank God for realism. And maybe I only think this because I played the sequel literally right after the original, but I swear the controls feel like they're so much better this time around. I mean, the first game didn't control bad for a game from 1997 after you finished a few races, but still though, it was a little bit stiff. However, that's not to say that Snowboard Kids 2 is perfect by any means though, cause while the racing is much better here, the side games still feel phoned in. Although unlike the first game, they did at least have better ideas here, it's just that none of them felt like they had enough time put into them is all. First, there's the trick game that makes you score a certain amount of points by the end of the course and within a time limit, which would be cool, but the problem is that this course doesn't have any real flow, and frankly, it just isn't very fun. To be fair though, Snowboard Kids 2 still did come out before the good old Tommy Hank game set the standard for trick-based gameplay, so I suppose I can't be too upset about this. And then there's the skill game, which is basically just Paperboy with snowboards. It takes a few tries to memorize where all the mailboxes are, one of them's hidden pretty cleverly, and then you're never gonna want to play this again for as long as you live under any circumstances whatsoever. And finally, there's the speed game, where all you really do is reach the goal within a time limit, which is pretty much the same thing as a race where you're not allowed to interact with the fastest competitor in any way, and they also always finish the race in the exact same amount of time. It's almost as if they finished the core game with like 2 weeks left before the deadline and tried their absolute best to fit any extras in with the time that they had left. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be too harsh on any of these bonus modes, though. Man, it's not like I'd knock Mario 64 because the minigame on the menu's not as fun as the main game. But when completing all these minigames is required to see the ending, then I've gotta at least boop the game on the nose over it. Despite that one minor complaint, though, I think Snowboard Kids 2 is a must-have for any 64 collection, because even though I said the first game wasn't as good as Mario Kart 64, I honestly think that Snowboard Kids 2 is just as good, if not better, than any other racing game on the console. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's as good as Mario Kart 8 if you expunge nostalgia from your body, but as far as 4-person multiplayer games on the 64 go, it really doesn't get much better than this. But it really is a shame that they never made another Snowboard Kids game, though, because when I look at how far the Mario Kart series ended up pushing things, I can only imagine how much better Snowboard Kids would have gotten with enough franchise milking. Oh well, I guess we'll never know, so I suppose that's the end of this video now. I mean, you can keep hanging out if you want, I guess, but... Wow, my unpaid intern just redeemed himself and told me that there's another Snowboard Kids game on the Nintendo DS. Don't get me wrong, though, I'm still gonna dock his pay for that little snafu from earlier, though. All I know is that I can't wait to play this game, so let's not waste any more time and get right to it. Oh my god, what the hell am I even looking at? Why does Slash have a band-aid on his face? Who does he think he is, Reka Hanabishi from Flame of Recca? The first two games had heart and soul with their oversized noses, but this DS version here looks even uglier than my grandma's yummy junk. I mean, I get that the kids eventually had to grow up, sure, but the name of the game's Snowboard Kids, so why the hell are Jam and Tommy friggin' 18 years old? These aren't kids anymore, they're full-grown men. I mean, they can legally buy cigarettes, pornography, and even go vote. And who on earth's this jabroni doing Jam's voice, and why is he trying so hard to force a Jamaican accent?
Baby jamming with me candy toss. You hear me, man?
Get these kooks out of my friggin' snowboard game. Hey, wait a minute. Why is Slash only 15? I mean, weren't they all the same age in the first two games? That's it, I'm signing up for Little League T-Ball as soon as I'm done with this video so I can reclaim my status as MVP again. I'm sorry if I'm overreacting, but this is just way too much for me to handle right now. I mean, I haven't seen a sequel like this since, well, Rugrats All Grown Up. In fact, it wouldn't even surprise me if the same people made the third Snowboard Kids game, so let's take a gander and find out here. Okay, I found it. What? In-Glove? What happened to the developer who made the first two games, Rekujin? Whoa, apparently they worked on Origami King. Well hell, if they're still around today, then why'd they let someone else make a Snowboard Kids game then? I don't mean to overreact before I actually play the game, but you know it's a bad sign when the developer doesn't even have their own Wikipedia. In fact, the only thing I could find on a video game developer called In-Glove is this random virtual reality company that uses a glove. Actually, I think they might be the same people who made SimAss 2000. And you know what, the developer Taku who made Little Samson barely even have a Wikipedia, so honestly, this game might not be too bad if I give it a fair shake. I mean, sure, SBK sounds more like a gang than the title of a Snowboard Kids game, but then again, I guess the Snowboard Kids are kinda sort of a gang if you think about it. I mean, they might not be selling my neighbor Terry's crystals for him or anything like that, but they are getting into a little bit of mischief here and there. Besides, at least they didn't call the game Snowboard Kids 3 after all, so let's be fair and see if the gameplay actually holds up here. Okay, so admittedly I had some hope for this game even after seeing the gameplay from the intro, but the menu's already being obnoxious as hell right off the bat. Anytime you move the cursor anywhere at all, the narrator tries way too hard to make the pronunciation sound cool.
Versus mode, option, training, shop, single game, Brad, Man Tommy, Nancy.
I know it's not that weird for games to do this, but at least wait until I confirm the option, you dingo.
You have selected Regicide.
Moving past the menus though, each character's got their own dedicated stories here, which is cool, and once the racing begins, I will say that it does control pretty well. Plus, it's honestly kinda nice that you don't always come to a screeching halt whenever you get hit by a weapon, cause it makes the game flow a little bit smoother in my opinion. I mean, if you're playing with other people, then it could definitely be satisfying to halt someone else's momentum, but seeing as I'm never gonna have the nerve to ask another human being to play SBK with me on the DS, I'd prefer to just keep the ball rolling here in the single-player campaign. But ideally, though, a game would make you want to play with other people, so I can't really say that the shot recovery time's a positive overall. But even though I like how you can recover from shots and items a little faster sometimes, I don't really like how the ski lifts at the bottom just instantaneously teleport you back to the start. Part of the fun of the first two games was scratching and clawing to get to that lift before anybody else so you could leave your opponents panicking for a few seconds, and above all else, it also gave Snowboard Kids its own identity. And as if it wasn't bad enough to strip the lift delays from the game, the items and weapons here are completely ruined if you ask me. Every box you see will only give you items rather than having separate boxes for shots, and since there's no money in the game, the items are always free, which is another part of the original game's identity that got yanked away here. Instead of buying the shots at the shops that are spread throughout the entire course, they just automatically charge up over time here. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to gain a shot, but if you want to charge them up to make them more effective though, then you could either wait a little bit longer or do some tricks which are actually kind of fun if I'm being honest. And in my opinion, they're a step up from before, which isn't really all that surprising seeing as how this game came out after the first 37 Tony Hawk games. You can deflect shots by timing your spins just right, but while I do kind of appreciate that the game tried to make tricks more important here, I still kind of prefer buying items from the shops in the first two games. I mean, sure, with shots only costing 100 coins, you'd pretty much be set for the entire race after going off of like 3 jumps, so there really wasn't that much of an incentive to do tricks. Well, you know, other than to impress the ladies, of course. But even though fully charged shots are more effective, it's still usually worth just firing whatever you got as soon as you get it. And seeing as how it doesn't take much time to charge another shot up, things could get a little bit too hectic here, whereas the shops in the first two games spaced the shots out much better in my opinion. Not only that, but while getting hit with shots in the first two games may have been frustrating as hell given how long they usually took to recover from, they were also satisfying as all hell to use on other people, so they were always completely fair in my opinion. But for whatever reason, most of the shots in this game usually cause status conditions like you'd see in RPGs. And it wouldn't be too weird if Atlus actually made this game themselves, but seeing as how the only game InGloves ever made was SimAss 2000, it kinda doesn't make any sense at all. Sometimes the shots just knock opponents down like the good old days, but for the most part, they usually cause paralysis, freeze, confusion, and penguin, and the only way to shake these conditions off is button mash. And like, I don't have a problem with button mashing to recover from things, but where SBK really crosses the line for me is how you have to recover from the effects of some of the items. For the most part, the items in this game have pretty typical effects like the landmines and walls that stop your opponents or arrows that give you speed boosts. Those might be a bit unimaginative, sure, but nothing that I'd really call bad in any way. However, 2 of the items in particular are just plain goddamn annoying, and honestly the absolute worst part about the entire series, let alone this one game. First off, we got the fog that blurs your screen up, and the only way to get out of it's to blow into your DS's microphone, which has literally never been fun in any game ever. What literally makes SBK completely unplayable in my opinion is being put to sleep and having to shout into your microphone to wake up. And trust me, you can't just speak into the microphone, you gotta shout into it, otherwise your character's never gonna wake up. I mean, the game's supposed to be portable, but depending on where you play it, you can get friggin' arrested. I mean, imagine if you were in an airplane and some asshole next to you started playing Snowboard Kids on the DS. Or even worse, what if you're in the middle of an intense race and then out of nowhere nature calls and you gotta take it with you to the can? Ah! Ah! If this game won't drive your stepmom to resort into adult abuse, then I don't know what will. I 100%ed the first 2 games before I made this video, but I'm sorry, there's no friggin' way I'm playing through this game multiple times and having to shout in every other race I'm in. Normally I'd feel kind of bad about this, but when I can't even find a YouTube video with more than like 15 minutes of gameplay that I could steal for this video since I don't have a capture device for the original DS, then I'm not gonna lose any sleep over not being the first person in history to play this game all the way through to the end. I know it sounds like I'm being nostalgic over the first 2 games, but just keep in mind that I had no idea they even existed until like 2008, and I only just now dove into them completely. So the problem with SBK on the DS is definitely not me resisting change or anything like that, it's just that it friggin' sucks. And to make matters worse, it's also pretty expensive in the aftermarket, too. It'd be really sad if the series ended on such a bad note, because with the potential a 4th game would have on modern consoles with the original developers making it, I really think that Atlus could have a sleeper hit on their hands. But in the meantime, though, if you're nostalgic over the first 2 games and think for 1 second that the 3rd one might not be that bad, trust me, it's friggin' horrible, not worth your time and money. Even without having to shout into the microphone, nothing about this game really stands out. The characters not only lost all their personality, but their constant screaming of cringy dialogue during the races is annoying as all hell. The courses are bland and have parts where you can get stuck, and never mind being comparable to Mario Kart DS, I honest to God think that even a game like Crayola Scoot's far superior. No exaggeration. I mean, I know that game's not even in the same genre, sure, but I'm just trying to stress how bad SBK really is, and that sometimes you probably should judge a book by its cover. So if you're looking for a hidden gem to party with on the weekends, then just stick with one of the first 2 Snowboard Kids games, or hell, even Terry's Crystals before you give the 3rd game a chance. But anyway, that's all for today, though. If you liked this video, then you might like my Persona Q2 review as well. If you'll excuse me, though, I'm gonna go hit the slopes IRL one last time to wash the taste of SBK out of my ass.
Snowboard full-grown men too!
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.